you never heard of. Hey everybody, welcome to the Common Folk Podcast with Ben, Morgan, and Andy.
All right, welcome back to Common Folk.
The podcast for the people, by the people.
Mm-hmm. There we go. That's right there.
We need to trademark that.
We should.
I think
We keep saying we're going to, but no, that takes a lot of time and money. No one has
Costs too
any
much
of
to
that.
trademark stuff.
yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like a $560 to get your foot in, and then it's another $120 a year. Like, and what are you paying for?
And then you got to maintain it.
Yeah.
And then if someone uses it anyway, it doesn't matter because then
Can't you sue them?
the lawyers are like, oh, well, you didn't have it trademarked for that.
Or-
and they're
or
kind of using it a
pay
different
me.
way.
Yeah.
And
Wait, do you think our lawyer would do that? David Madden?
well,
He would tell you that you can be sued or they can sue you. Like, oh, my hands are in the air. Oh.
the company that Dave used to work for is who handles all the trademarks because he doesn't.
Oh,
And I've had this happen.
okay.
And I'm like, can you guys go ahead and please send these people a letter and sue them for, using a similar...
Yeah.
And they're like, well, it's not quite the same. But you can do that if you want, but this is what it's going to cost.
Oh,
And,
God.
Yeah.
and you're probably not going to win. And I'm like, get out of here.
Yeah, I was actually reading through my trademark for our hunting show.
Okay.
I'm like, this doesn't guarantee us anything. Like, what do we buy?
No.
Like, what is it? It doesn't protect the logo. It doesn't protect the thing. Like, well, okay.
Here's what it does. Here's the only thing it's ever done for us. So we handle merchandise and branding. There's a ton of what appear to be Chinese companies knocking off logos and designs.
Oh, sure, yeah.
And selling
Yeah.
shirts online.
Easy.
And a lot of them sell them on Amazon. And they have their own little, Amazon store or
Yeah,
whatever.
they're coming under fire on this. The Amazon
Well,
is.
they should.
Yeah.
So I can go on there and I can search, farm focused, and stuff will start coming up. And then if I send, because they almost always have contact info, if I send that store an email and say, hey, look, you are violating the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. We own this design. You need to take it down immediately or you're going to get sued. They always take it down. So it works for that, but I could totally be bluffing and telling them that I have it trademarked,
Sure.
and they'll still take it down.
Right.
But we really do.
And the
Yeah.
CCP would probably beat you in a, lawyer up. You want
bastards.
to lawyer up against China? I don't know.
Yeah,
about-
they might win.
Hey, we'll see.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we
yeah,
would.
yeah. It's
that
probably
time.
just some
Let's do it.
person
Do it.
in
I'm
their
ready.
room printing. It's not like a big company.
Oh,
Oh.
there it is.
Was yours supposed to be better than his? It's just opening a can, guys. Come on.
I wasn't. There's no competition. I was just saying this.
Ben tried to compete with you. Did you see that? He was like,
Was he really?
yeah, he put it
I thought
up
we're
to
on
the mic.
I thought we're on the same team here.
You're the competitive one, not me.
I'm not cracking it one today because I got to run kids around. Kids.
Kids.
Later.
Whatever. Let's get to it.
We have a guest
So,
here. I
yeah,
mean,
we
we're
do.
just neglecting this gentleman sitting here.
It's all right. It's not my first time.
So no, I do want to say this. So we got Kyle Lechtenberg back on, and we got a lot of reviews. I heard even from back home.
Did you?
You saw a little bit of it on Facebook.
Yeah, there was a
some
little fallout.
Yes.
I wasn't here last time,
would say
so I'm kind of
fallout.
excited.
Oh, was this the
was
last
good.
episode?
There was a
that you weren't here?
fallout?
Okay.
Not. I wouldn't say
Fallout's
fallout.
maybe the wrong word. It was good dialogue.
Right.
But
Right.
who didn't like it?
I think they liked it.
Yeah, I wouldn't say they
Seemed
didn't like it. Yeah, like
Oh,
brought
more
it-
well,
positive.
good.
right.
Okay.
Brought light to
Because
a
I
subject.
liked listening to it.
Yeah.
Well, any of these topics, you're going to have like feelings on one side or the other.
Yep.
All the stuff we talk about. So you heard from folks kind of on both
Yeah.
sides, and some folks that were like,
Right.
hey, man, you guys need to think about this or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
So what were they saying?
Well, a lot of it had to do with the corporation, this corporate farm out of the Minneapolis area that
Okay.
was buying up ground in Boyd County and Knox County and Holt County. And we didn't really dwell on it. We just brought it up and like, oh yeah, they're doing this, they're doing that. But
It's kind of like macroeconomics versus micro. Like it was localized, bringing it very local, and some of the same types of things come out.
Okay.
Whether it's local or on a world stage. And
Gotcha.
But he snuck one in. I mean, I had all those notes in front of me last time.
Yeah.
And little stories I wanted to get into. He was being a little too self-deprecating. He's like, oh, well, Andy was such a baseball all-star. He probably didn't notice I was on the team. Like, this guy, And this guy's family, they're all exceptional athletes. And on top of that, they like would work really hard and they'd put in the work. So like if you had to go up against them, you knew that not only were you up against like a really good athlete, you were also up against somebody that put their time in.
Yeah.
So they kind of like double mind F you in that way.
Right.
Like they already won.
Really deserved it, too.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So he worked that in on me.
Little exaggeration. I think
no.
it's a lot of small school, small town folks around the state. And in the Midwest, it's a level of grit that you're talking about.
Yeah.
It was everywhere. I mean, every small town. And that's, as we get into this topic of estate planning, you'll see grandparents, parents, kids, grandkids. There's a level of grit that's pretty neat, which makes transition hard. And I don't mean to jump into the topic.
No,
but
No, it's great. But it's got to start from somewhere.
But-
you know what I
Right.
mean? So,
I'm going to tell a quick story first to lay the foundation of who this guy is.
yeah.
So we'd always do a co-op team, right?
Yep.
Butte, Spencer, Lynch, all the towns in Boyd County. And your older brother was up to bat, Brandon. He's a year older than me, 2 years older than you, right?
Yep.
And Doug Williamson, another
Doug
kid from
Nolan.
Butte. Doug
But
Nolan,
yeah,
Doug Nolan.
Kurt was
Kurt
there
Williamson.
too. Yeah.
He was sitting next to me, and it was getting down to nitty gritty, right? Bottom of the seventh inning. We were down by a run, but a guy was on second base, the whole 9 yards.
Okay.
And Doug hollers out, "Come on, Brandon, be a Lechtenberg." And then started cheering. And then he looks
And
at me and goes,
everybody from Lynch is like, "What's that mean?"
no, we knew. Everyone knew. And then Doug looks at me and goes, "I said that because, the Lechtenbergs are so good and they always come through in the clutch and they're so clutch and they're so good anyway, but they're really good in the clutch. That's why I said it like that." Like, I got you, Doug. I understand.
And did it happen?
Of course it did. I think he hit a double,
damn.
run scored, tied it up, and we went on to win the whole 9 yards.
Okay.
Oh, there you go.
Brandon was a Lechtenberg at that occasion.
Brandon, out of any of us, was the clutch. He was the one that least expecting and the most talented. He was.
He had a humility about him.
Yeah,
Just the way he
something
kind of
different.
walked.
Yeah.
Like he kind of had those shoulders that kind of drooped down. You're like, I'm not expecting anything from this guy.
And then he
There's-
shows up.
Oh my God.
We have a family joke a little bit, and I apologize ahead if I got family members listening, but my brother Adam was kind of this golden child who got all state this, or he got all whatever rewards, and Brandon was always kind of had a chip on his shoulder. And so, just to fast forward, these two have got into college football coaching, and Adam's a Division I college football coach at Central Connecticut. And so the family text came out, and we're all congratulating him. And so prior to this, Brandon would always one-up Adam. And just about everything. Like we were talking track just at lunch today. Right. Brandon's team ended up winning state 4x4, and we also discussed how that grit. We were never the fastest. Never ever on any team was I the fastest. None of us could jump the highest or anything, but had a way of, specifically they would be successful. A lot of Doug and Kurt, some of those guys that you guys obviously know no one about, but it's still, Brandon would always one up Adam. And then the whole family would kind of be like, "Oh, well, I guess nothing to see, no big deal. Good job, Brandon." It's like, and then we'd be like, "Thanks for leading the way, Adam."
Right. Yeah.
So I kind of threw a little grenade in the family text. You know how we all have these little group texts and family texts. So Adam got the Division I Central Connecticut State Division I head coaching role. And so everybody's, "Good job, great job. That's so cool." And he always wanted to do that growing up, so we were really proud of him. And so I threw this little text in there. It's like, "Well, look for Brandon to be the Alabama D coordinator now."
There you go.
Like just to rub it in. And so we got some comments on that. But
I bet.
Nice.
That's what a family text is
Yeah,
for.
that's healthy. That's healthy as long as it's
Controversy.
in good fun and no one's
Sure.
getting too butthurt over it.
yeah.
Sure. But so the last time we had Kyle on, we touched on family estate planning and just like what could happen and kind of like the windfall that you were bringing up. And we both said like that would be a good thing to follow up with. And Kyle, you're more than willing to kind of share some thoughts with us on that. And I'm personally, I selfishly want to know because we have a family farm, ranch, whatever, and we're going to be going through that probably sooner than later. You hate to admit that,
Yeah.
but we all are. I mean, we're on your family farm right here.
Yep.
Ben. So
Right.
I think it's not only top of mind for us, but it probably should be for a lot of folks out there. Or it's something that they've thought about, but they just kind of push it off or push it back.
I think that's the case. Is that you know what you're talking about? Primarily, we're talking about farms, ranches, big property ownerships in general.
Yeah.
You know, the value of everything's gone through the roof. I mean, you could have 20 acres, and that's something that needs to be planned for. Like there's a lot going on there. So with that in mind, and the effect that it could potentially have on all of the other things, you know, what's happening. You know, people are bitching about one of the episodes we did was where we were talking about with these foreign companies coming in and you know, buying up land. Why are some of them even getting the opportunity to do those kinds of things? Right. You know, people are talking about like factory farms, you know, like that's this big term, like, oh, these big factory farms are buying everything up. You know, anymore the 1,000-acre row crop farmer can't make it anymore because there's these other outfits that are buying all those 1,000 acres up, and now they're 20, 30, 40,000 acre operations, and they're factory farms and all this kind of stuff, you know. But it's a lot of it, in my opinion, based on the stuff that I've seen and that I think you guys are going to talk about, is a result of either some of that poor planning or I guess which also is probably poor planning, just not having many options of what to do, you know, when people pass on or when it comes time.
Or not knowing your options.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's why I want to get Kyle in there and, you know, in here and get into the nitty gritty of it a little bit, you know?
Right. And I think for me, you know, from the podcast entertainment side of this is I think everyone has some stake in this. Like everyone, whether you own a farm or you don't, if you live in a $300,000 house in suburban America, you are going to be affected by what is happening out here on these farms. And this is something that you need to know and something you need to understand.
Yeah. I mean, just the property taxes alone, right? And how is manipulate the right word? You know, you're talking about a piece of ground in the middle of Omaha compared to a piece of ground, you know, in Cherry County or whatever, you know, like there's such a huge spectrum there, a huge difference.
For sure. So with that topic, where do you guys want to start?
I think Kyle needs to start it. Like, okay. I mean, I was talking to you about like the 5 do's and don'ts or most uncommonly factors that people don't account for, and one of them we kind of almost segued into is family. Like, is everyone's goals in line with each other? You know, does this brother want the same as that brother? Does this sister deserve as much as that sister? You know, like, how is it handed off, or what should Ma and Pa do to kind of line that up and at least get a head start there with it?
And maybe to kind of like broaden it a little bit, and I don't know if you know this or not, hopefully I'm not putting you on the spot, but is there any kind of general number in terms of how often is this happening? Like, what are we looking at? You know what I mean?
It's happening daily. I mean, I would say where I would like to start, I'm here representing Foundation Wealth Advisors out of Norfolk. Prior to that life, I was meeting with high-level executives within Farm Bureau of Nebraska, American Farm Bureau, trying to solve and crack this puzzle of estate planning. And I think when it comes to transition, there's a management component, there's a business component. Dr. Hansen out of the University of Nebraska, he's retired now. He's a mentor of mine, and probably a lot of this interest started with him 20 years ago, where once I learned some of this, I then became permanently interested in transition. And so what he would say is you should get everybody at the kitchen table. Basically, you need mom, pa, every kid there, and in-law if you're willing. Some families choose to have in-laws, some don't. So what we've been doing a lot of in terms of multi-generational planning is trying to get 2 or 3 generations involved, at least to start talking about it. Because it's one thing to go to Christmas, go to Thanksgiving, go to Easter, and say, oh, we should ask mom and dad what their plans are. it's quite another to actually sit down and discuss what is going to happen to the estate when they're gone.
Yeah.
And I think, to speak to some of your earlier conversation around corporate farming, there's a vacuum in the industry that's been going on for at least 15 years, probably more, that nobody wants to recognize, nobody wants to talk about, and it's the corporate farm mantra that is basically, that's the only option at some level, because as farms consolidate, they also have to grow their management ability. They have to develop. They have to learn things they hadn't done before. There's a certain size of a farm. Most people don't know this, but about 3,000 acres, your entire job changes. And then about 10,000 acres, your job changes again. And so up till 3,000 acres, you can kind of manage the farm as a doer. You can basically do the tasks and be a workaholic and get it done.
Yep.
Operate the combine, feed the cows in the morning.
Yep. Pay the bills. You can kind of do that up to 3,000 acres. Well, most people don't know that 3,000 acres is probably, I don't know the exact statistics, but it's not a huge farm anymore. Most folks, if you guys have friends that farm, they may farm 4,000 or 5,000 acres as a multi-generational farm. And so, the average might be 1,500 acres or 1,000 acres or 2,000. I don't know that number, but I know for a fact your job changes at 3,000 acres. And so another fact that comes out is oftentimes a business that has the ability to transition rents about 3/4 of their operation. So a lot of times, at the coffee shop, you hear so-and-so owns all their farm and everything. They own 10,000 acres. The reality is, in most cases, statistically, they own about 2,500 acres and they're renting 7,500 acres.
So that number you were talking about earlier, when you're saying like 3,000 acres is that cutoff, you're talking about farming 3,000 acres, not owning 3,000 acres.
Farming, operating a business on 3,000 acres.
Yep.
And then that stays the same too, though. Like the numbers stay the same as far as if he's farming 3,000 acres, he probably only owns what, 750
or whatever the number is.
So
there's a lot of that. Yeah.
But at the coffee shop, you own it. Oh, so and so got a hold of so and so's property. Now it's theirs. Well, not in the books. Not on the books.
And without jumping the gun, I mean, another thing going on there is, so let's take that one individual that's covering 3,000 acres and 2,000 plus they're renting. There's a landowner on that other side that owns thousands. And that's another person, like they're not actively working that ground, but they need to be thinking hard about what we're talking about.
And statistically in Nebraska, it's majority of the time it's a widow woman. It's actually just from actuary tables, women live longer and they end up owning the land longer. And so widowed women are the largest landholder in Nebraska. And so that's good, bad, or otherwise. It doesn't matter. These are some facts that I'm laying out for you guys to be thinking about. And so that person has to kind of be thinking about a plan of what they want to do transition-wise. And a lot of times, if there's 2, 3, 4 kids, maybe one has interest in coming back to the farm. Maybe none of them do. And depending on the size, whether they could or couldn't. And then there's also, and again, I'm kind of opening up all the cans all at once, but there's also the cost of transition. Some estates want to endure a cost of transition. Some are very much, no, we don't want to incur that cost of transition.
And what do you mean cost of transition?
So great question.
Okay.
That's bringing in the next generation of management.
And that takes lots of money.
It's significant.
Are you talking about the death tax? You hear that a lot. You hear death tax.
No, this is more of a management transition.
Okay.
So to bring somebody into the scope of a business, when you think about corporate farming or most corporate farms are actually family farms. They just grew to a point that their CPA said you need to be incorporated to protect your liability. 99% of the time that's the case. Actually, corporation is literally a tax term. It means nothing beyond an entity structure. And so
it's just been
it's just good business to be incorporated.
Sure. Yep. And it's been kind of like used as like this bad word.
The 1%ers with all their big money.
Yeah. Like, don't get me wrong. Like in regular business, like I'm not a big corporate guy, but when it comes to farms, I understand what that means. It's just kind of how they're structured.
Yeah. Yeah, you want to get in an LLC to protect yourself.
Because it might be a corporate farm, with the air quotes here, people who aren't watching on YouTube. But there might only be 5 or 6 people involved.
Right. Yeah.
Or less.
Right.
2, 3.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, many times, probably more times than not, it's parents decided to get incorporated and they're bringing a kid in and they've had a C Corp since the 80s.
For sure.
The 70s and 80s, those were popular. Now S corporations and LLCs have become more popular to help bring in the next generation. So,
So you brought up those costs. What other, costs are involved with that? Because one of the buzzwords or things that I kept popping up on me when I was researching this was death tax. Like, when grandpa passes away, you better be ready because this death tax is coming and you better have your ducks in a row.
well, there's a couple statistics that are relevant. In 2025, the estate tax will sunset, and so what that means is an estate of 12.9 million and over gets taxed. As the Trump tax would sunset, that number would go to 6 million. Well, you guys can probably imagine that you don't have to be a very big farm owner as a baby boomer to own $6 million worth of property. So anything over 6 million is going to be taxed at 40 to 50% levels. And again, the different, some of the details, we'll have to get a CPA on here too.
Right.
But
Yeah.
it's a very high tax. And so when we think about what's coming up, whether Congress will hold that together or keep it higher, continue to grow with inflation, that's a cost, whether that number's at 12.9 or 6 million. I mean, you think of transition costs. If that family gets in a car wreck and they have 13 million in 2026, and now they have a $7 million taxable estate, so 13 million minus 6 million, saying that these tax cuts sunset. And I know we're getting into the weeds here. I'll try to keep it as much surface as I can.
Don't lose us.
Yeah, so let's just say 50%. Well, that's a $3.5 million tax. So who has to come up with that number?
That's crazy.
Yeah, usually it's that next generation of children that have to, and generally if it's in an ag estate, it's the farming child that's got to figure out how to come up with that.
So if I'm following you, this is where we get to the root of this problem. Number one, there's not a lot of liquid assets in these operations. So you're looking for $3.5 million to do whatever, and no one can come up with that.
So what do you do? Sell a
Exactly.
piece of land?
Yeah.
Well, then that hurts the operation.
And even that, like maybe a piece of land, but if only 30% of what they're farming is what they actually own in a piece of land, I mean, that's a big issue. There's not a whole ton there. And then you've got these kids who now they're getting saddled with this, and they throw their hands up and they're like, there's nothing I can do here. Then all of a sudden what happens? It goes off.
Yeah, oftentimes the farming child's left with that decision of, is this worth continuing as a business? And what I would probably say most of the time, and I think we'll continue to see more and more of this, is the farming and non-farming children are going to look at it as passive income or passive estate. They're not going to look at it as so much as an operating business. There are going to be the ones that continue the legacy of turning a 5,000 acre farm into a 20,000 acre farm. But again, the cost of that transition, just because you got 2 or 3 job changes in there, you've got to do self-developments, business planning. There's a lot that goes into that to be successful at it, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And so
it's funny you mention that because dumb it down on a much dumber level for me, like being a content creator, doing this channel on YouTube and other channels that I manage, you get to a certain point where if your channel's doing X amount of views, then you shouldn't be editing your own videos. And my thought is like, what are you talking about? Like, the whole reason I'm doing this is because I like to edit videos and I have fun with it. And it's like, no, you won't have time to edit your own videos. Your job has to change.
The financial management changes enough. You become a financial manager versus a farm tractor operator, so to speak.
So, like, right now I'm at that 3,000 acres looking at 7,000. You know what I mean? It's like, you shouldn't be editing that much video. You should be pawning it off on Fiverr or whatever.
That's kind of the bitch about like entrepreneurship in general, because I don't know anybody, and I'm sure there's a few out there, but that get involved in it with like this long-term picture in mind, going, what I actually want to do is just kind of run a business from the outside and be the guy with all the strings and doing all the things. Most people start a business and go, I really love doing this, and this is how, so this is why I want to do it. Yeah. And then it starts growing to this thing where they like they're holding themselves back, or they're building something for a future catastrophe.
Right. And it's like forcing you into a hand that you didn't want to play. Like, no, I enjoy editing videos and putting funny noises to it, making people laugh. But no, you got 100,000 views on that. You can't afford to do that anymore. You got to move up. You got to be a planner. You got to tell people what to do. You can't even get behind a camera anymore because your time is too valuable. Does that make sense? Like, you can't,
the levels and the glass ceiling that kind of get built in the business.
And just when you said that, like, I tied it to another conversation I was having with that, and like, you need to back off on the editing. Like, that's what I do.
I think that's why entrepreneurs like starting businesses, because the exciting part is the first 3,000 acres. And speaking in generalities of all business, it's fun to start things and get it going, and that's probably my nature too. I enjoy that. But you get that first 3,000 acres, and then you're like, okay, to go from there to 10,000 acres, I don't know if I want to sit in an office every day.
Right.
That doesn't sound very appealing to be, out in the field doing X, Y, and Z or whatever.
I think with some of this kind of stuff, and I don't know if you have any numbers or off the top of your head if you brought any, but I just like Googled a couple things real quick and add to this if you have any. I just Googled how many family farms need to be prepared for succession. Like, what's going on right now? And
all of them.
Right, yeah.
Good answer.
Says,
100%.
It just says right off the top, while nearly 70% of these operators expect their operation to continue as family businesses after they're gone, only 23% of them have created a formal succession plan. And it says that's especially worrisome when the average age of the American farmer is now 57 and a half years old.
Wow.
You start thinking about that, man, like, that's
scary.
That's crazy.
Well, and on top of that, you've got, so a succession plan is one thing. This is the part that nobody talks about.
Yeah.
The management plan is another.
Okay.
And so that's the 23%. So you got the 70% that's transitioning from grandpa and grandma.
Yep.
And now you've got this kind of middle crush generation that are trying to figure out, they've, ran the equipment their whole life, and then in their 50s, they're trying to figure out how to manage a lot larger financial scope of things. And whether it's they're trying to buy out a brother or sister or whatever, those buyouts become really expensive. I mean, when you think of land values, I know in Boyd County, just this week, we were talking about a piece of land along the Missouri River that brought $10,000 an acre. And that's going to shake the just kind of the ag landscape up there. And kind of from Omaha, from Oakland, from Norfolk, it's like, that's normal up there. We're still much higher down here, but it localized to bring it up there, that's a big shake to everybody. Every kid that wants to farm up there now looks at buying out their 2 or 3 siblings as much more difficult.
Yeah, for sure.
And those off-farm children are looking at that as saying, well, I just became XYZ more valuable. And so there's that dynamic of, kind of trying to buy out the siblings of the estate. So there's kind of your high level of that land transitioning, but then that farming business or that farming son or daughter, what are they going to actually do to be able to afford to be able to do that?
Yeah. This may sound weird, but I was just thinking, all right, so we have children. Let's say we had thousands and thousands of acres. If I knew 2 of my children did not want that at all, why would I even put them in why would I even have them do that? Like, be a part of that? Or like this have the farm so then they can fight later.
Well, I
Like,
think
why
there's
wouldn't I just
more-
give them this X amount of money? And so then the kids don't have to say, I'm going to buy you out. Like, why are you causing riff as the parents?
Well,
Is
you
that
gu-
a
you
weird
guys-
question?
You guys tell me if I understand this.
I don't know.
You're
I'm just
perfect
saying.
for this podcast.
I mean, there's a birthright, right? There's a birthright, period. You
I'm
know?
sorry. I don't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
like,
bullshit. I was born into this family. I deserve what this farm was worth.
So when you think about
Right?
the thing is with a lot
no
of
one's
these
entitled to
farms-
anything. It's not like.
So Dr. Hansen always said the first thing he says to let's say we're a family meeting, and he says
We're off to a
to
great
the
start here.
kid, the first thing he says is, "Your parents don't owe you anything."
Okay. Am I not like, I don't feel like I should have to owe my children this land just because I birthed them.
I'm telling you, that's not how children feel.
I'm sure they don't.
Right, but also like if you die, like it's still gonna be there and it's gonna be worth something. And you're going to prefer that it goes to someone you made.
Well, yes,
then,
absolutely.
you know.
But I'm just saying, I guess there could be a plan for a death. But if I know a child is like into something that's nothing of the sorts of farming, why would I, in my right mind, think?
I think here's what the other problem is, that with farms, a lot of the value of those individuals is wrapped up in things like land, things like equipment.
Okay, so like they don't
items.
have
Right,
a lot of
yeah.
other money.
Yeah, it's
just
not like it's
laying
not
around.
a lot of people, and that's
Well,
I
part
think
of the
that's
reason they don't is because they've been avoiding taxes for a long time.
Sure.
I wanted to get
There you
into
go.
this.
Yeah.
I really wanted to get into this.
Yeah,
Just-
and that's just a way of like it's.
What do you mean avoiding
So it's what
taxes?
this company, or not this company,
Not
this
being
country.
liquid.
It's what
Okay.
this country has built, all of the regulations and things, and so then people are trying to figure out ways to work with these systems, and it's like, when you hear a guy say like, "Oh, I gotta go buy a new truck every year."
Yeah, it's like,
Like,
oh,
well, he's got-
sorry for you, Joe.
But he's got to do it because it's like some kind of tax, incentive and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And if you
There's
take
a
that,
code section 179, you can write off 100% of an item, a pickup, and so these CPAs are instigating this.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
they're actually, you can write off $500,000.
But you still
the
have to
first
pay
year.
for it.
well,
they'll go to the
You pay
government
taxes
through taxes.
or interest. So you
Yeah.
pick.
yeah,
Oh, yeah.
You got to spend.
Okay.
Yeah, and the way I've heard it put is, you got to spend shit to make shit. So
yeah.
like that's a Boyd County quote right
Oh,
there.
I'm sure.
Well, it's also one of those things where you decide, like, do I want to give my $100,000 to the government, or do I want to give my $100,000 to Chevrolet?
Yep.
Or whatever. You know what I mean? Like in a
Yeah.
general way.
Here's the crazy thought that went through my head as I was kind of researching for this one for you, and I want to get your thought on it, because we all know people, and we're talking about it right now, how they have built this farm on showing that they come up with just barely a profit or a loss, so they can maximize taxes and get their truck or whatever, every year. Yeah, isn't that astonishing? Like, this guy is losing money on the books, but every year he has a new combine that actually has his name embroidered in the leather seat. Like, it blows my mind. Like, this guy's broke on paper, but look at this.
It's an anomaly. Keopaugh County, which is near Boyd County, is I think a statistic probably 10 years ago, they were like the number 3 poorest county in the country. And as you and I know, you go out there on a hunting weekend and there's brand new pickups on every site, and there's a brand new combine. There's the best cattle in the country. And so it's partly because of that section code 179, where folks are, you might, as a business owner, you might make $200,000 or $300,000, and your tax guy says, well, you need to go buy that pickup, buy that combine, and then they'll kind of manage to make that break even or there. But somebody's still got to pay the interest, and you have to have the money to do it, so you borrow money.
Right.
So some of that happens, and
Yeah.
then the land appreciation kind of at the end of the day trumps everything, and that has in our current state that we're in right now.
Well, and so that's what because Ashley and I, my wife Ashley and I, were kind of talking about this too, just coffee shop talk going back and forth. When you predicate a business on showing that you're operating at a loss or very minimum, making a little bit, like that just doesn't, on the surface and in any any thought, that's not good. Like, your business is showing that you're losing money every year, and then on top of it, you're proud of it. Like, so what I'm asking you, Kyle, is, has that set the table in some form of way to where we're at now, where you're so unliquid, you have no liquidity, now you're on your knees to this system that's going to sell you off now piece by piece. It's going to turn brother against brother, brother against sister. Grandpa wants to do what's right, but he can't. And it's all because we all just played right into it. Like, I know it makes no sense, but I got to show that I don't make any money. Like, if I feel like if everyone would have just said, hell with it, I'm going to do it, quote unquote, right, and I'm going to maximize this farm, and we're going to make as much money as possible. Like every other goddamn business, you're set to make a profit. And now we're running into this, I don't know, it feels as hopeless. Like everyone's going to have to sell off. With the stat you just read, only 23% are set up to even think about handing it off to the next generation.
Right, yeah.
So it's just going to all go to China or Ted Turner and his Buffalo Ranch or whatever. But the little guy's up against it here, and I feel it's a little bit of their own doing, but they're just playing ball.
Yeah, but you look at it on a national stage too, though, and you hear all this stuff like, to hate to bring it up, but like the whole Trump stuff that's going on and everything that he's been doing with his businesses and what he's getting accused of and all this kind of stuff, right?
Because I'm smart. I did it because I'm smart.
I mean, it's like it's just business in the U.S. Like that's just how this stuff works.
Of course I'm not going
he's
to pay
heavy.
taxes.
Trump, even the first round, was heavy into real estate, and they have some of those same depreciation loopholes that he admittedly fully utilized the tax code to get around. So if he's successful, he's going to triumph that. If he's if something didn't work, he's got his way to describe why it didn't work. I use that one for depreciation.
And he was applauded.
Yeah.
He was applauded for not paying taxes. Like, I feel like that was an I gotcha. See, he's not paying his taxes, and he comes in, I didn't pay taxes because I'm smart.
Yeah.
And we're like,
He was like, but he did say, I mean, and he wasn't wrong that
at least he owned it.
Hey, I'm just playing the hand I was dealt. Like this is the rules they made. I'm just playing by it. So.
But I'm sorry I went on a rant there, but so Kyle, did that lay the foundation for this?
I think this topic, this needs to be like the 5-part series because there's so many levels here. I want to touch back on Morgan's where I know a family that desperately didn't want their kids fighting. So for a lot of years, they just did everything with the neighbor. They had 3 or 4 family members that wanted to be involved in agriculture and at their own personal level were.
Okay.
But the parents decided, well, we just want to avoid conflict, so let's work with the neighbor, and that model pretty much worked. So there is some success in the fact that if you protect your kids from that. Arguably, someone, and even my wife, in my experience, my goal with like our agriculture of the state is to give my kids an opportunity if they want to. I don't fully expect them to want to farm but if they have any entrepreneur spirit and they have any belief that they want to have a resource to start from, I don't want to have me in the way of that from them trying.
Okay.
And so a little different there than what you were talking about, but I think that's not uncommon where you have a wife or a spouse that feels like, well, I don't really want the conflict. Why don't I avoid this? And then a lot of years ago, one of the kind of philosophies was to buy life insurance on the estate for the non-farming children. So essentially, that's a lot of big words for just saying that basically the estate was designated for one child and one child only.
Okay.
And the life insurance would pay the other kids out so that the farming child would not have to come up with this out-of-pocket huge estate loan to buy these 10,000 plus acre farms to be able to keep the farm together. The problem with that model, I would say 15 years ago, it started – the numbers got too big. The life insurance, so the old thing where the daughters off the farm would get the life insurance, but it would be like
it wasn't enough.
It was not near
even close.
Not even
okay.
close. So
not fair. Okay.
Excuse me, definitely not fair.
I gotcha.
And so that's an old strategy. There's still some places for it to work, but generally that's something when I was in college and even before that, we heard a lot about that strategy of trying to buy life insurance for the non-farming children, and then they would get a buyout. And I think that worked probably through maybe the 90s. I don't know.
Yeah.
But
I can kind of understand like what you're saying, where you're coming from. If we take it into our own,
I know. I just
house,
don't
like,
feel like
we're running this business, and do any of our 3 kids show interest in being a part of this business? So then you look at that and you're like, well, you don't even want anything to do with this. So like, I don't really want to gift this business to you because I know you're not going to carry it on. You're not going to do it justice. You're, whatever. Like, it just doesn't add up. But then I think on the other hand, like, there's so many people who don't own or run a business, and they're working a 9-to-5 or whatever the job may be, and they're building up this retirement bank account, and then at the end of it they're like, okay, well, this is getting divvied these ways, so it's like, what is the difference? I don't really know. I mean, I think there's some debate to be had there.
Yeah, I don't either. And then I was thinking of, our parents, like, your mom has land and whatever. I don't feel like you, and I know you don't feel like you're owed that.
Mm-mm.
You just don't.
Yeah.
But I guess we are maybe different than other people.
And it's also, there's also a different value there, because we're talking about like
50 acres or something.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about like a few $100,000, maybe $1 million, whatever. But when you're talking about like
thousands of acres,
yeah,
maybe that's where maybe that's where it changes, is when there's more acres and there's more.
Sometimes
stuff.
there's a misconception. The kids might think they all own 5,000 acres, and the parents are like, well, we actually only own 900 of this. The rest of this is creating the jobs and the income to get you guys through school or whatever,
And this thing's worth nothing if people don't continue to do the work every day.
Yeah. If nobody's going to operate those other 3,000 or 4,000 acres,
then nothing,
the estate's not as big, kind of like you're saying. It's not as, and I wouldn't say I see a lot of entitlement from that mentality. There's a little bit. Occasionally, you'll see a situation where somebody got taken advantage of, and it's like, really, that's unfortunate, but you just
most of the
work
time
with
you
it.
wouldn't. Okay.
I would say majority of the time people aren't in this expectation mode of I'm owed this or I deserve that. But once in a while there is that case where, and I guess in my role, it's my job to be like, what's your business plan? Why are you owed that? And oftentimes they can't answer that, and you're trying to coach them to figure that out. And
I guess this all goes back to where you started it. It's a roundtable discussion. Like, that's where it needs to start, with
get
families
everybody,
on the same
talking
page.
about the same page. And I think that's the trick.
That was the next question I was going to ask, essentially. So, like, we've talked about all this stuff. We've, like, kind of highlighted a bunch of these problems and why this is all a thing, why people need to be concerned about it. For you and what you guys do, where do people start? What do folks need to do, and kind of take us through that?
So from what I see, and again, even back beyond my initial job right now, comprehensive financial planning is where to start, and basically starting right with yourself, right with you and your wife or you and your spouse, and if kids are getting of age where they're interested, kind of figuring out what they want, what you want, where you're going. And if you're involved with the next generation. So one thing we're doing right now is basically on the onset of anybody becoming 70 years old, we're trying to include that next generation in one meeting a year. Just because from an estate planning standpoint, if something happened to that older generation, car wreck or cancer, quick anything, do you have the foundational paperwork in place to transition? So beneficiary alignment. So financial institutions all have their own specifically that can be different than estate planning documentation. So our job is to basically align the two, make sure they're the same, so that a bank may have their own designation and the estate documents may have something different. Yeah. Meaning basically when people sit down and do this, if they did the financial institution 5 years ago and they're doing their estate documents now, they'll oftentimes assume that what they say now is what they said 5 years ago, but it's not.
It's not.
It's not the case. Oftentimes,
yeah.
it's not. So you said this over here. Which is it? So then you reformulate it. So some of it's just assessing estate documents and making sure they're in good order and making sure they're in, the way that they want them.
What do you recommend to someone? Because I feel like I would be in this camp that you're doing your thing. You're an entrepreneur. You started farming. You've grown your business. You're just a hard worker. You love doing it. You hate thinking about all of these other things that come along with it. And you've had kids, and maybe the kids were interested, maybe they weren't. They've moved on, and you're starting to get up there, and you don't have any plan, and you don't even really want to think about the plan. You don't care, but you might die tomorrow. What do you recommend to those folks? Because like you said, like early on, they should be meeting with a financial advisor. They should be having things in place. Like, yes, perfect scenario for sure. But how about the people that haven't at all? Like, what do you do now when you feel like, man, it's getting late. I need to think about this.
So ultimately, there's this concept of releasing control, and so you non-resist. So just actually a week and a half ago, I was with an 80-year-old guy, and multi-generational meeting, and we're sitting there, and they're trying to bring the farming son wants to do all this stuff, and the parents, and he actually told me prior to the meeting, he said, I'm not ready to give up control.
Oh.
Okay, so that's an easy meeting. You know where the power lies, and you know where it's going to end. And we talked for a couple hours, and at the end of the meeting, I told the son, told the spouse, I said, ultimately, we all know this is in your decision, so you got to tell us how to move forward. And I tell you that story because often that's the case. The person in control does not want to give up control, and until they can get to a position of giving up control, releasing control to a son, a spouse, a daughter, a neighbor, nothing's going to happen. So and so you can kind of work on those, and you kind of just end up doing, in my position, I'm an employee to them because I'm just formulating documentation according to that. But ultimately, in a case like that, nothing's going to transition because they're not willing to release the control. So it does come down to control, unfortunately.
But you can like put out a map, right? A road map, lay down some pieces there. Like, okay, you control it. You control it. You still got it. But if something were to happen,
here's what could happen. Like, here's your plan.
And could he actually like sign on the dotted line? Like, okay, if I die tomorrow, good Homer Simpson quote, you could wake up dead tomorrow. If he wakes up dead tomorrow, like, could you get something in line where, okay, these things will happen then?
And in this specific case, they have good estate documents, but we're working on management documentation for the next generation. So it's kind of like if something happened, for sure, there's a plan of action.
Yeah.
The problem is nobody else likes it.
Right.
So so
of
you have
course
this
not.
case
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
you've got kind of the Godfather in control, and
he's saying you're going to do this, you're going to do that, and you're going to take that, and you're going to be happy, and nobody's happy.
Nobody's ready for that. And I ran through that scenario a couple times where it's like, and I could tell the next generation's not on board with it. But
Right.
what do? You can't, until somebody's ready to relinquish control. And I think that's a testament to any area of all of our lives. I'm a parent and a father of 4, and there's things with that you kind of get forced to relinquish some control with kids, right? I mean, you kind of, and so there. I mean, in an estate situation, you kind of become, you can hold on as tight as you want, but the harder you hold, the tighter you squeeze, the less chance that estate has to making it to that 23% that actually can transition. And I'm using your number, but kind of can make it to that next generation of business owners in agriculture.
So we've gotten a ways into this, and I've heard you say this a couple different times. So let me ask this: is there some kind of difference that I apparently didn't understand prior to this between, you keep using the term management and like the ownership or the succession, or does that make sense? The question I'm asking?
I think part of that is one of the 5 top things that happen, that ends up being the downfall of a family farm, is farms are expensive to run. And from time of death to, the next generation taking over, even if you got the foundation, the whole roadmap put together, you still need to figure out how to finance that for a year to get this all transitioned over. And you still got to come up and pay this, pay that, pay employees, rent the ground, because 70% of the ground that you farm isn't yours. You got to come up with that cash, and you don't have access to that cash, because it's not just overnight type of deal. So is that like part of what you're talking about, management?
Yeah, there's just more of that. I mean, and oftentimes that larger father, mother will say, well, when we go, we'll just quit doing this over here because they won't be able to handle it. Well, the only reason they can't handle it is because they don't know about it. Oftentimes they don't have the relationship, they don't have the phone number, they don't have the connection, and so it kind of goes back. You got to communicate that. You got to sit around the table and talk about it if you want it to continue. Now, there are tools out there. Ameriprise specific has a real estate investment trust where you can 1031 exchange out of farm ground and into an investment. And so that's a tool we're starting to expose people to where those non-farming children can still inherit an estate and do very well, even prior to death. Because at death, they get a stepped-up basis, which I don't want to get into the weeds too much, but basically they get to set the value on the property in the death of a owner. And so that maybe the parents got the land for $100. In today's market's $10,000. If the parents die, the kids get a step up in basis. You'll hear that term a lot in the national news when they talk about, at least in ag circles with the American Farm Bureau, who I have some history with. We were constantly talking about wanting to keep stepped up basis. That's why, because the children would get that stepped up basis. But if before death they want to transition the land, there's not a good way to do it. Some parents will deed a piece of land over to a kid.
Yeah.
The problem is now that kid has a $100 tax cost basis. So if they ever decide to sell that land, they're going to get murdered on taxes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's where a real estate 1031 exchange would be a valuable situation for those heirs that maybe don't want to. They don't necessarily want to own and manage farm ground.
So let me see if I follow you. That 1031 allows you to invest, but then also kind of side by side update the value of the property.
The cost basis.
Right.
Well, you don't get the update. You get to carry the investment forward with the same cost basis, but you can sell it over time rather than all at once. So let's say, for example, that you got deeded a property from your dad, and now your cost basis is $100 an acre because he deeded it before he passed.
Right.
And
we got
now,
from great grandpa.
Yep.
It's just stayed that way.
Yep. The cost stayed low.
Yep.
And so now you're like, gosh, we could really use that money at $10,000 an acre. So now you sell it for $10,000 an acre.
Crack's a hell of a drug. Cocaine's a hell of a drug.
And so now you're hit with this tax liability where
There's no way.
In 1 year. So you have all that capital gains in 1 year.
Yeah.
To where the REIT would make you be able to sell it off over time. And again, we won't get into this today because it's more complex, but annuities work the same way. And so if you buy an annuity at or if you inherit an annuity, you have to pay the tax over time.
So those particular things that you're talking about there, is that where you guys specialize in that kind of stuff?
Foundation Wealth Advisors. Yep, we do all the above. And so for me specifically, I really like that ag estate transition piece, though, to really frame up. We don't do all the paperwork. We have attorneys that help us, but we can really quarterback it to sit around the table with you and develop strategy. Because a lot of times CPA, they're mainly looking at work to do, like they're actually preparing documents and processing taxes. Attorneys are the same way. They want to know what you want wrote up. And so sometimes our job is to kind of create that strategy and help them.
You're like glorified counselors.
We are. My MBA has an emphasis on
Like,
counseling.
yeah,
I'm doing that
you're
on
a good
purpose
talker,
because
and like
it's literally. I feel like our whole industry could evolve into kind of this kind of coaching.
yes,
type
that's what I was
thing.
thinking. Coaching, counseling, like the whole
Yeah.
mentoring.
I think there's a definite need for it, especially if family farms want to hold on. Because if you don't, it'll just be gone.
It'll go
right?
away.
So is that where that
to
comes
these
in?
Potential foreign entities.
Right, that's what I was
For sure.
thinking. So is that where that comes in, where it's just easier, and like China's like, hey, I'm going to make this easy for your family. Here's this
the
cash.
money. Yeah.
Yeah, and cash.
And
Yep.
it's that easy.
And 2 kids didn't want anything to do with it. The one that does, he's an asshole anyway, so sell
They'll
out.
take the money.
Yeah,
Okay.
take the money and run.
Yeah. All
yeah,
right, that
yeah,
makes-
definitely.
yeah.
Like the big money people like that make it easy for people to just
Right.
kind of, well, forget about it. We don't want to deal with all this crap. We weren't prepared for it. We're
Yep.
going to take a beating if we do anyway.
Yeah.
So we'll just.
Let them have it.
I gotcha.
You know,
Yeah.
and I think that's where what I was saying in the beginning, where the interest needs to come in from folks who are listening to this who don't necessarily own a bunch of farm ground. Maybe they know people who do, or maybe they're the kids of people who
Yeah.
own a bunch of farm, or what.
Get
They
talking.
need to have interest in this, because we are all going to be affected in one
Right.
way or another in the end.
Right. And I don't care, like if it's a business or if it's a farm that's only 1,000 acres, 1,500. Like, man, if you grew up on that farm with your 2 brothers or whatever, like my story, we all care about it to a certain extent, and I think we all want to keep it in the family some way, shape, or form. But like, it's not just going to happen.
Well, and
we
from
got to
a-
figure that out.
Kind of from an investment standpoint, real estate's a great way to. There used to be. This is not so much sold anymore, but Ameriprise, before it was Ameriprise, talked about these 4 cornerstones of investing, and one of the cornerstones was real estate and cash, and then I think bonds and stocks. And so I actually still like that analogy today. So, because I work with mostly rural folks and mostly agriculture, and going forward, it'll get more and more specific to that.
Yeah.
And so I actually love to hear that, because there are ways to keep that in the family. There are ways to keep it growing, and it fits into a global portfolio for you and your family most generally. Now, one thing, I came from agriculture, went into investment management. One of the first things I realized how much over allocated I was. I owned some farm ground at 3 different counties, and one of the things, we have a tool called Total View. So you put in all your investments, all your retirement accounts, all your bank accounts, savings accounts, if you got any liabilities, and you put in your real estate. And so I put everything in there, and it spits out, I'm like 97.5 allocated to ag land, and I'm like, oh my
boy.
gosh, I'm an investment advisor. How do I, that's the other piece of my life, is the investment advisor piece. So it was just interesting.
Yeah.
A year and a half ago, we started putting some money in the stock market to kind of rebalance that a little bit. And
I talk about diversification.
yeah, I sell it every day, and here I am, a real
Right.
estate owner,
Yeah.
So, but I do, to your point, my brothers similar grew up like you. We talk about how my family's all over the country,
Yep.
and they'll always say, we'll talk about real estate in their part of the country, whether it's Brandon in Oklahoma or Adam in Connecticut, Lance in Kansas, and always they say it's not Boyd County.
Yeah,
and of course,
right.
to you
Yep.
guys, that means you're like, I would never own property.
Yeah,
there.
right.
But to
Yeah.
Andy
Yeah.
and I, it's
Oh,
like,
yeah.
if you can own a little piece of Boyd County, you got
got it.
everything. Right.
Yeah. Well, you were just up there pheasant hunting.
Hey, it's a
Even
pretty
though-
cool spot, man. We
Yeah.
had a good time. I like it.
It is. It is. It's heaven on earth. But I think a lot of folks think that of where they grew up, and that's good. I think it's a good thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think the reality is
the
that
common thread.
it's just becoming, or it probably became a long time ago, just one of those things that you got to do. You got to figure it out. Like, if anything is going up in value and getting crazy, it's land. I mean,
Yeah.
that's through the roof. We're seeing record sale prices for stuff. It's unbelievable. folks have to get ready for that. You just have to, if you want to keep it around, if you want to have that pride in how you came up and what the family owned and carry it on and those kinds of things.
Share it with the next generation.
Yeah. And hopefully, more and more folks get motivated to be a part of it, physically.
No, I when Kyle just said, it fits into a global portfolio, you keeping your family farm, but you got to do that legwork before it's too late.
Yeah.
Right.
And it might be a rental property that your grandparents lived in. I was just telling him when we got here how cool this is. My grandparents, we turned their house into an office, and I not sure how my extended family always fully felt about that, but my assessment was we were running a business that was growing, and the for that area, the next generation of managers was not going to live in that home. I mean, they just weren't. I hired managers, and they were not going to come back to live in Grandpa's home anymore. They were going to live in the next town that had activities that they wanted to be doing as a family. And so
and those farmhouses, you drive by them all the time. They're just a big square block that's painted white. You know what I mean? And
pretty cool.
It has 2 windows here, 2 windows there, on each side, and that's it. But it's tough to try and hire somebody and put them in that.
Was there anything else, Kyle, that you'd want to leave folks with on this particular topic?
I've just enjoyed being here. I love this conversation. And so I think that's what drew me back was just, I could talk about this every day. Obviously, that's kind of what I'm doing now daily. And so I just thank you guys for having me on and enjoyed the conversation again. Anybody
who if this sparks some interest and they want to talk to someone, I think we talked about this before, but how do they find you guys? Where can they look you up? Again, I'm in Oakland, Nebraska with Foundation Wealth Advisors and Ameriprise Financial, and our core office is in Norfolk, Nebraska. We've got 8 other advisors, and so I would say agriculture, estate planning is something that I'm passionate enough about. If somebody wants to have a deeper conversation to get a hold of me there, you can. We got a website and all the social media links, but if you Google me, you'll get there, or Foundation Wealth, you'll be able to find us. I don't know what all my links are specifically. But
I looked up some of those links, and I put them on our last podcast.
Good.
And you got a bunch of hate mail, so I must have got the right ones
good.
up.
Good. It means you're doing something.
Yeah.
And are you guys servicing folks all over the country or regionally? Or okay.
So my vision for our office is to become fully digital capable in 3 years. Meaning, what that means is wherever you're at, in my mind, even globally, you would have access to our tools and our abilities to help you in business transition, agriculture transition, real estate, estate planning, and so that's even to the point where down the road, I think we'll be able to offer some fractional CFO services to larger farms that are hitting those 10,000 acre platforms, or getting to a size where they need different types of development and different types of learning that I had to go through myself. So some of it's self-deprecating and trying to use stuff that I've been through to benefit other folks.
I know we've talked a lot about ag and farms and ranches and stuff, but do you guys deal with businesses in general with that kind of transition planning as well? Okay.
Yeah. And I see that's where I think my future will be is in some of that business, financial planning, estate planning, and compensation modeling and stuff like that. So that stuff gets me pretty excited. We could have another podcast on that.
We probably should. As I said earlier, I'm one of those guys where I don't have that plan together. So someday we're gonna have to sit down and talk with what we got going on.
We'll just talk it out over the common
I'm probably like a lot of people listening to this. I just, you don't like that thought. You don't want to.
Dude, it's like the dentist. I know I should go, but I don't want to.
Yeah, but then
it's just gonna give me bad news and make me hurt.
And then probably once you do it, then you're like, man, I should have done that a while ago.
Yeah, my teeth look better now.
Oh my God.
Yeah, probably the funnest thing we hear is when people leave the office. And this has been a fun thing to hear is, I'm so glad I met you. meaning this is
Yeah.
not what
Yeah.
your common investment advisors are doing.
Right.
We're specific at Foundation Wealth. We're specifically doing beyond that, kind of into this kind of coaching role of helping people through this whole process, and that's my passion of
Which
wanting
is
to be.
good. People need that. They don't know where to go, where to start, what to do.
Help lay a path
Yeah.
and also be that third party where there's not that tension.
Yes.
You know?
Yes, that's the biggest thing.
think
People
so.
won't bring it up on their own. Like families generally won't bring it
Yeah.
up on their own. They
Yeah.
almost need anybody in the room that's going to say,
Yeah.
you got to say what's on your mind, or we're not going to move this thing
Right.
anywhere.
Yeah.
And getting back, full story here, Kyle's an instigator. He's a Lechtenberg, so he's not afraid to be an instigator.
No,
So he'll instigate that
unfortunately or
conversation.
fortunately, yeah, I've been accused of,
Uh-oh.
No, he's a perfect guy for the job.
Well, hopefully this rang some bells for folks. Again, in the ag world, I think it's extremely important.
Oh, yeah.
I hate to see the number of family farms. Like, I mean, I see them on a monthly basis that are dealing with this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I think last time you and I talked, I had met with a guy not far from here that was going through the same thing. He was a guy that was renting ground from the old man, and the old man had 3 or 4 kids, and he was his wife had passed on, and he ends up basically working with the guy who's renting the ground from him to give him all of that and work with him, and the kids are out, and
what
the
a
kids are
mess.
pissed, and
Yeah.
there's a
I
pickup truck
remember
over
that,
here,
yeah.
and there's a tractor over here, and there's all these
Yeah.
things, and the guy's telling me about it, and I'm like, oh my gosh, man, I can't believe this is what's going on, and you hear about it all the time.
And it's one of those cases for me, it's like it's heartbreaking on so many different levels. Like as a nation, you want to stay strong and you don't want
Yeah.
to see the degeneration of families and there's that big macro. But then on the micro, because you know a guy now, and you're seeing that with our neighbors and wherever else, whether it be Boyd County or whatever, you can actually bring it home and you have a story where it's like, man, our neighbors. And those two guys, those two brothers or brother and sister, they were so close growing up, and now they can't even talk to each
Yeah,
other.
they hate each other. Yeah.
Yeah, because the farm didn't break down the way they thought it should or would.
And for me, I think the bottom line is that like what the government wants to do with these kinds of things, that's where our enemy is. Like, I'm not saying the government's our enemy. I'm just saying like that's where the problem is. So we got to find people like Kyle that are wanting to do these things, that are going to give us some education, share with us what your options are, how these things can work. And you just got to bite the bullet and you got to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
Bite the bullet.
Figure it out,
Call
right?
Kyle.
Get the instigator involved.
Yep. There we go. All right, what
Not
else?
sure if I want that to be my
Like-
motto.
He's going out on that.
We'll put that
We
in there.
called the instigator up. We're going to have him come in and shake you loose, Dad.
See, I said like glorified counselor, and he's saying instigator. So that's
Well, you need someone to kickstart the conversation,
Again,
and
yes.
everyone agrees it's a conversation that needs to happen.
Yeah.
So, and Kyle's coming from a good place. So,
Right.
I'm not going to say instigator's a bad
We'll
word
put it in the
this one.
title. It'll be in parentheses.
There we go. The instigator, just like the Terminator.
yeah. There you go. There you go. Well, thanks
Alrighty.
for coming. It's nice to meet you this time.
Yeah.
Glad you came back.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I forgot you didn't get to meet him last time.
I didn't. Yeah.
Yeah, man, it's good to see you again. Thanks
Good
for coming
deal.
out. Thanks for making the trip. Anything
Awesome.
else?
No.
No?
All right.
All right.
Peace.
We'll see you.
Later.
Thank you, guys.